Up next on Inside the SCCA, climbing the racing ladder. Welcome to episode 214, I believe, of Inside the SCCA. I am Brian Bielanski, and I am really looking forward to this show. Our guest today is someone who I met over the broadcast at Sebring, and she was racing Formula Continental at Sebring. Her name is, I'm going to screw it up, so I'm going to look at it. It's Arshia Akhtar. How you doing, Arshia?
I'm doing great, and you said it perfectly.
Oh, good. Welcome to the show, and I'm so glad to have you on. We've been trying to find a time over the last couple of weeks, and we saw you first on track. I saw you first on track at Sebring. I don't think I caught you at any of the races last year, and then you came up and joined us on the broadcast for a little bit, and we had a wonderful conversation. And it's funny because when you were on the show was with me and Greg on the broadcast, someone said, you've got to get her on a podcast. And I had already been thinking that, so thank you for that little suggestion. And then we traded contact info, and we've been working on getting a time, and we're all set. We're all here. So welcome. Coming to us today from Texas, where that's home base for you.
Yes.
Let's get right to the first question. If you've watched any of the shows, you know what's coming.
Mm-hmm.
And that is, how did you fall in love with this crazy sport of ours?
Well, it actually started when I was much, much, much younger. So when I was about 12, I started watching Formula One. It started off like a random ad, and I was like, what is that? So I've been a McLaren supporter since. I did take a break.
Go Papaya.
I did take a break when Lewis moved to Mercedes.
Okay.
Because it's really hot, obviously.
Of course.
So I was supporting them, but now I'm back to McLaren.
Very nice. Very nice. So that's how you got interested.
Yes.
Now, when did you first decide to be a participant?
Yeah, so that actually happened last year. One of my friends, 2023 is when that happened.
Okay.
So one of my friends, he challenged me that, oh yeah, you could beat me at rock climbing, you could beat me at skydiving, at snowboarding, whatever, but you can't beat me at karting. And I was like, let me take a shot at that. So I started doing karting, league races, and then I was like, you know what? I have a couple of podiums in now. Let's get into, let's go get an auto license.
Cool.
So I applied. First and foremost, I had to learn how to drive a stick shift car.
Right.
So that was a whole deal. August 2024, about 12th August to 14th of August, I learned how to drive a stick shift. And the next weekend, I was at Pitts Raceway in the SCCA event doing driver school and an event.
Wow. Very cool. So I guess we should probably step backwards just a tiny bit.
Yeah.
You have an accent.
Yes.
That means in my general guesstimation that you're not from here. Where are you from?
Yeah, so I'm a Pakistani who was born and raised in Saudi Arabia, basically.
Okay.
I did my med school over there, but growing up, I think we did have restrictions, right? The Saudi Arabia that changed after 2018 is not the Saudi Arabia I grew up in.
Right.
And I moved to US around 2017. Women weren't allowed to drive at all. So I never learned how to drive a car at all. And then I had moved to Boston for, my work and my schooling. So nobody needs a car in Boston,
right.
Who's going to drive in all that ice? So I didn't get a chance to learn how to drive an automatic car up until 2021.
Okay.
So that's fun. That was my first time on the road.
That's so cool. So growing up in Saudi Arabia, becoming a race car driver is something you probably wouldn't have a chance to do if you had stayed there, right?
Yeah. I'd say that now that they're pushing towards it, and now there are some opportunities emerging. However, there's still a bigger accessibility issue.
Sure.
We do not have a lot of driving schools or events that are happening. So there's a big accessibility issue over there.
Right. What do you do over here? Because you said you've moved to Boston. I know what you do, but share with us a little bit about what your background is as far as what you do off the track.
Yeah, so I have done medicine, and I currently work in clinical research with end-stage cancer patients.
Wow.
So patients who have a life expectancy of 3 to 9 months, working on new chemotherapies and drugs with the FDA.
I hadn't thought about this right now until just now. My mom passed a couple years ago from a soft tissue cancer that started behind her knee and then basically metastasized through a lot of other parts of her body. But when we first found out, they had said that my mom had, maybe a short period of time to live. And then she spent some time working with the doctors at Mayo Clinic, and they said, well, we've got this trial. And my mom's like, sure, why not? And over the course of 4 or 5 years, she was put into several trials that worked a little bit, but not as well as we would have liked them to.
Yeah.
But because of researchers like you, we got another 3 or 4 years with my mom she was pretty comfortable. So she wasn't any kind of, I won't say any kind. She had a decent quality of life throughout that time. And it's because of people like you who are working really hard to find cures that happened. So let me take a moment to thank you and your colleagues.
No. And like you said, right, where you were able to add a couple years to her life.
Right.
Like every single breath, every single day matters. So even though we do see a lot of failures, and in our mind, a failure is not truly what we view failure as. A failure in our mind will be that we were not able to even add a day to a patient's life, right? That is a failure to us.
Right.
So as long as there's even a little bit of improvement, that means that we could refine it, improve it, and hopefully make a difference in somebody else's life.
Well, and that's why I said it didn't work as well as we would have liked, because it did work a little. And again, it gave us some extra time. But what I also think is important is that by my mom being part of those trials, that data and information comes back to you.
Exactly.
So that you can then use that to modify or do whatever it needs to be done to maybe make it better the next time.
Exactly, yeah.
So, and I will bring this back to racing. My mom was one of our biggest racing supporters, was with us at the racetrack when my dad and I were racing. And she was a huge Haas fan because she liked Tony Stewart. So then she became a Haas F1 fan. But yeah, so thank you. Didn't think this podcast was going to go to that direction, but it just popped in my mind, and I wanted to take the opportunity to say thank you for that.
And I think it absolutely impacts my personal life as well. It has completely changed my outlook on life, right? How I view even racing.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just starting off. I've done about 7 races at this point. So I've been hit with multiple failures, multiple, things that I have to learn back. And I think it has given me a different mindset.
Right.
So it does work both ways.
Well, and I'd have to think that as someone who's just starting out in racing, there's a couple of ways you can go about it. You can just get tons and tons and tons of track time or lots of sim time and learn through trial and error. But when you have an analytical mind, I assume that the skills that you put to your job are also the skills that you put to making yourself better on the racetrack, and that might help you progress faster than maybe someone else.
I think the biggest skill that has helped me overall actually comes from being on the race operation side of things.
Okay.
To be honest, because I'm going through the steward in training program. I'm also flagging, so I do learn from what I see other drivers do on track, right? How they're behaving, what can get you a penalty, what can you get away with, like pushing those limits, learning how to behave on track, and having that overall mindset has definitely added to a lot of refinement.
There's so much to talk about here. You are experiencing the standard SCCA new blood experience. When we find someone who's new to the club, who's excited to be here, who has the time, we're like, let's get them into the steward program. Let's get them into the flagger program. If they're not going to drive this weekend, let's make sure they're at the racetrack to do something next weekend.
That's exactly, yeah.
And you've got this infectious personality, which is one of the things I immediately noticed during our talk at Sebring. And you're eager to learn, which is so important to what we do. So I love that. So it's a giant leap, especially if you didn't start in karts. I'm going to guess because of, I'm not going to ask you how old you are, because that's not something I should ask a lady. But just from your timetable, you weren't starting in karts when you were 6 or 7 or 8 years old. You started in karts probably a little later in life, which is not the typical way people do it. But it's a giant leap to go from karts to cars, isn't it?
It is, and it can be a little intimidating. I'll be honest, I'm like mid-20s, 27 right now, so that's where I'm at. I started karting around, 25? So literally mid-20s, right?
Wow.
Yeah, and no prior experience to that, like no motorsport experience to that. So I think the transition was really, not the transaction, the transition. The transition was
right.
Really funny because I went from karting to a Mini Cooper to a Formula V to an F4 and then Continental over the period of 5 races.
Right.
So and I'm just like, you know what? It's fine. Like, I just need to tweak a little bit of my thinking, my movements, and then I'll survive the car. As long as I'm handling the car in a safe manner, I know that I can push it.
Right. So how did your progression, what was the decision-making process to go from Mini Cooper to Formula Ford to Formula Continental? Was it just the car that was available to you to drive at that point in time, or was there a thought? Oh, I see kitty cats behind you. That's awesome. I've got one over here sleeping in the sunlight. So if that cat comes in, we'll have cat meeting. What was your thought process on how you chose which cars to drive?
Yeah, so Mini Cooper was what was available to me at that point. So that was my starting point. I was like, you know what, I'll take it. And honestly, a shout out to Frank. He was willing to lend me his car. He did say that he wasn't going to give me his prettiest car, though. I still hold that against him. So I drove his ugliest Mini Cooper, but I was able to position second in my class. And I was like, you know what, I think I can push it further. And then I tried out first time in a Formula V because I wanted to know what open wheel cars felt like. So I think that gave me a good step up into that world. And they felt like really fun go-karts. So I was like, you know what? I can definitely push that further.
Right.
Got Formula F4, basically a chance to drive that, was able to handle it well. And then I ended up with Formula Continentals. And I think this is my happy place. I like the speed and power ratio with Continentals. I want to build up on that and then go into a higher ranking car.
Sure.
Or higher class of car, yeah. But this is like my happy medium.
Sure. So how much was your first love of motorsports, Formula One, the pushing point to get you to stick to put your foot into open wheel, and now you found your happy place? Is that a big influence?
Yeah, you have this bias of like, oh, this looks so much cooler. So that definitely played into it. It's about the aesthetics, right? You have things that look pretty to you, and I'm like, yeah, that looks pretty.
Inside the SCCA, presented by RaceSchool.com. Our guest, Arshia Akhtar, is here with me today. So happy to have you with me for this conversation. So you're 7 races into your career. Yeah. Let me ask you one other question before we get to this. You had to learn how to drive a car first.
Yes.
Then you had to learn how to drive a stick shift.
Yes.
We've had conversations on the show, and it's something that the club's going to have to deal with a good bit in the future. It's hard to find a stick shift to learn how to drive a stick shift, and that's going to mean at some point in time for people who drive Mini Coopers and sedan-based cars, our pool of stick shifts to make race cars out of is going away. How hard was it you to find a car to learn to drive a stick shift in?
It took me 2 weeks to find how to get an SCCA license. It took me 4 weeks to find a stick shift instructor.
Wow.
So yeah, it was difficult, and then they do cost a lot, right? I mean, if you don't have your own car or your parent or somebody teaching you how to drive a stick shift,
right,
there is that cost point as well that comes in.
So did you go to one of the major rental car companies and try to find a car to rent for a couple of weeks? Is that how you did it?
So there, I looked up basically driving academies for stick shift, which are basically for like chauffeurs and valets and all of that, and talked to my instructor and basically convinced them that yes, I won't wreck the car, but I need to be in a race car in 2 weeks, so help.
Yeah. Did you kill it the first time? Because we all did.
I mean, the instructor was fine. Nobody died. It was fine.
Right, but
the standards are really low.
Your first time though, from zero to just starting out, when you let the clutch out, did you kill the engine right there?
Actually, no.
Oh, so good.
I killed my engine the fourth time when I was taking the car because they were like, "Wow, you could do it," and then I was not able to start. I sat there. Right at the green light, trying to restart my car with my visible panic on my instructor's face.
That's great. That's great. So 2 weeks to find out how to get into a school, 4 weeks to find a car to learn how to drive a stick shift. Now you're at your first school, fairly new to all of this. Frank is your guy. Was it his Mini that you took through the school?
Yes.
Okay. Frank's a friend of the show. Been on several times. I actually had dinner with him at Buttonwell a couple of weeks ago. Great guy. Great ambassador for the sport. Amazing. His willingness to help people get into the sport is. We need a lot more Franks in this sport. And he's never given me a car to drive, so I'm not saying that just because he's been nice to me to give me a car to drive. Tell me about that first driver's school.
Yeah, that was intimidating, to say the least, right? So I flew all the way to Pittsburgh from here, and the first thing I said to Trenton, he was the guy who Frank gave me to, deal with that weekend, he was my crew. The first thing I looked at him, I said to him, I was like, I will try to not wreck the car, but I just learned how to drive a stick shift. So how do you change gears again? Can you please remind me?
Oh, boy.
Yeah, it was crazy. And the fact that he was trying to walk me through right before my first session, 10 minutes before first session, I was learning how to change at what revs.
Right.
And what to do and what revs are and all of that. So very intimidating. I get into the car. I go, on the track. The other people who were getting the license with me were little, I say little, but 16-year-old, 17-year-old kids, right? Who have been on that track, who have been in a race car before and are trying to get their SCCA license. So first lap in, I was half a lap behind already. It was really intimidating, and the instructors were really helpful and very patient, to be honest. Now that I look back at it, to how much they were dealing with me, but there was a point, right, where they were like, I don't think if you keep doing it at this point that you'll be able to get your driver's license. We are not sure that you can actually pass this weekend, and I like that honesty because that gave me a very realistic perspective of what's online. I've spent thousands of dollars to be at this track at this weekend. What I will be losing, and it was motivational, but a reality check as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So when most people go to their first driver's school, they've got a lot to learn, but how to drive a stick shift's probably not for most people
Yes.
the thing. But the more I think about it, the lack of stick shift cars out there today, I don't imagine that your story is terribly uncommon these days. Certainly when I started, it was not common. My dad, because he knew I wanted to drive a race car a little bit, one of my first cars was a stick shift, and I drove it back and forth to school every day. So that wasn't something I had to learn when I got to my driver's school. I had to learn a lot of other stuff.
Yeah.
But I think today your story's more and more common. I think the only difference is maybe some of the people coming to driver's school probably did some shifter karts.
Yeah.
And while that's different than driving a car, at least it is shifting a vehicle.
And understanding that, right? Because when, like, my first session out, I spun out mainly because I was not shifting at the right point, so the car was losing power, and it being a front wheel drive car adds to that on the Pittsburgh raceway curves. Like they're on the inclines and downhill, so it wasn't really helpful.
Yeah.
I was just trying to not be a menace on track.
Well, that's a good mindset to have, because a lot of people come in full of themselves and all full of attitude and thinking that they're going to be the next, the next Lewis Hamilton or the next, whomever. And they end up being idiots on the racetrack. And if you go in with the right mindset, with the right attitude, for one thing, you're going to go farther. For the second part, your instructors are going to appreciate the fact that you're being humble about this, and they're going to be more willing to spend extra time with you to be able to help you get to the finish line of the driver's school, which is hopefully a license. Now, you said that they warned you after probably a couple of sessions that this might not be the school that you'll walk away from with your license.
Yeah.
How did you progress throughout the weekend?
Well, after that, I was like, you know what, just give me one more chance. So one of the instructors are on that track is Bob, and he basically sat me down and he was like, listen, you have worked in ER. You know how to handle stressful situations. What are you doing out there? Like, why are you in the middle of the track not making decisions, which you need to make? And I just sat there. I literally, first I cried, and then I sat there. Like, I literally was tearing up in my corner. I was like, oh my God, what have I done? And this might come across as weird. I'd rather die than fail.
Oh,
that's the mindset I live with, right?
Sure.
That was hitting me in the face. But yeah, and then I was able to improve myself a little bit, but not enough. So they were thinking about different opportunities. They were like, oh, do you want to get in time trials? We could get you that. Over there, you'd have to focus more on your lab rather than keeping up with the pack or passing and this and that. That really helped. And that's where I was able to position second in my class, because then I was able to find some space and do a bit more sessions. And honestly, everybody on that racetrack, a true shout out to the SCCA Pits Raceway team. Were so accommodating and dealing with everything and all those changes. Insane.
Yeah. You mentioned in your research, in your job, that there really isn't failures when it does absolutely nothing.
Yes.
So no matter how you finished that school, there would have been no failure, because you learned so much from the moment you took on the racetrack where you didn't even know exactly what a rev was to shift at, to where you ended the weekend. Did you end up with a license at the end of the weekend, or did you have to do one more school?
I did, yeah. I got my license. I got most improved driver of the year.
Of the school?
Most improved driver of the year award, actually.
Oh, wow.
And I also got my medal. So it was an insane win out of that.
Yeah.
And I think if everybody around me was not that positive, I was hitting my breaking point. I was sitting there in my hotel room. I'm like, I don't think this is for me. Maybe I'm overestimating myself and all of that. So yeah, I think and this is what I've noticed overall, right? Throughout SCCA, it's extremely supportive. Everybody is there like a true family, especially with somebody like me who doesn't have any family over here. So I'm here by myself, and I truly, truly rely on the SCCA family for that emotional support that comes in.
The SCCA family is a wonderful group of people And we love, as I tell people, we start coming for the cars and we stay for the people. That's why you come on a Saturday or on a weekend that you're not driving and become a flagger or, be part of the stewards and training program. It's not because of your love for cars. It's because you've met people that you want to hang out with. So that's fantastic. Let's do this. Let's take a short break here so I can thank all of the people who helped me do this job. And then we're going to come back. I've got a couple different areas I want to explore here with you. So stay with me. We're going to do that in just a second. Let's talk about the people who helped me do this right now. Of course, it's Inside the SCCA, brought to you by RaceSchool.com. RaceSchool.com is out here on the West Coast. They're based here in Southern California at Buttonwillow, and they do some stuff out at Willow Springs as well. And they are really great folks. They've got a great system for teaching people with no experience, as well as kind of taking you and starting where you're at if you come with some experience. Their instructors are world class. They have a great system. They actually start teaching you before you even get to the racetrack, which is really cool. So if you want to become an SCCA driver, they've got licensing schools. If you want to do performance driving, self-defense, defensive driving, or self-defense, defensive driving, just check them out, raceschool.com. Next up, Ray Esports, the official sim racing league of Inside the SCCA. Love what Ray does, what Stevie Ray does with his team and with his races. If I wasn't recording this podcast on a Saturday morning with Arshia, I would be sim racing right now in either the Formula V or the Spark Racer Ford groups that he does. And so check them out, Ray Esports. William R. Penterick and Associates. Dave Penterick, he's a GT1 driver, a Spec MX5 driver, and he has a wonderful business for helping people with their finances, financial planning. David's a great guy and a big supporter of the show. Check him out at William R. Penterick and Associates. And then, of course, Solo Performance Specialties. They are at most of the national tours. They have everything you need, from tires to gadgets and doodads. Check them out at the national tour races or check them out at their website. It is Solo Performance Specialties. All of the information for all of these great partners are in the show notes. Arshia Akhtar is my guest today. We are back here for the second half of the show here. And before we get to more about the next couple of races and what the future holds, you said you're here by yourself, no family.
Yeah.
Does your family back home know what you're doing?
Now they do, yeah. No, I didn't tell them my first race weekend.
Sure.
That I was doing all that. I sent pictures to them after I had done everything.
Okay.
Yeah.
What was their reaction?
Well, I don't think they comprehended what I was doing because, they're like, oh, what, like you went, drove a car, I guess, like something happened. And I think that was the right call at that point.
Sure.
Because when I actually did my first Formula V race and I sent my mom like pictures of that, she freaked out. And she was like, oh my God, is that what you're doing? Like, what is happening?
That's too funny. Too funny. You have, at least at Sebring, and maybe you can tell me whether this is at every race, you had a camera crew with you, and you have put out some fantastic social media since I've been following you. And how important is that to what you're doing?
So the camera crew is actually with GC. He is making a documentary about SCCA. So that's the camera crew story.
Okay.
I'm not like a Kardashian in making
Oh, sure.
That's our camera crew. Just kidding. But other than that, I think social media is a really important part, right? I have people asking me questions on how to get into racing, what is SCCA, how to get into flagging, all of this. And yeah, I think in today's world, that's how we communicate. Like that's, how everybody gets to know. Nobody's reading newspapers, all the time anymore. So it's a big part of it. And not just in US, from Pakistan, where we have a really limited accessibility and people who are really passionate about racing, I'm able to help them out as well. I did not realize back then that it'd be helpful to this many people, but it has been.
Yeah. I won't be telling you anything you don't already know, but there aren't a lot of women racers out there, in the United States or even in Europe. I'm guessing there's even fewer in Saudi Arabia and Pakistan. And do you think about what inspiration you are to young women in Pakistan and Saudi Arabia and in the Middle East who might have an idea that maybe I could do something like what Arshia is doing?
I don't think I realized it initially, but now when I have women approaching me through social media and asking me questions on how we can start. So as for Pakistan, I am their first female driver who has achieved even this much.
Wow.
Who has been into an F4 level car or, a Formula Continental or have won anything on track at like a national level outside of, in Autosports. So I wasn't even aware of that. I found that out last weekend is when I found out about that. So that's when it started hitting me where I was like, okay, so me being on social media and being in a car does make it seem like it's a reality that it's achievable. And then you can start thinking about what are the hurdles, right, that you would face as a female. So I think to even have a dream, you need to see like some form of vision. And I think that's where I have I think I have that opportunity and that privilege that I'm able to do that. So yeah, that's great.
That is pretty awesome. So you go from Mini Cooper to Formula V to eventually Formula Continental. That's what you were in at Sebring. How many Formula Continental races have you been in? Was that your first at Sebring, or had you been in the car before that?
That was my second race.
That was your second.
So I have raced twice in Jan, once in December, once in November, once in October, and August. So those are my race counts, basically. One race a month, right, is my minimum goal.
Right.
With the Continentals, at Homestead, I think it was a better start, given that, you can just go through the oval. Even though the first time I came out of that oval, I was like, I get NASCAR drivers, like, what goes into their head? Yeah.
That's
awesome. It
was
crazy, yeah.
Yeah, very cool. Very cool. What do you think of the Continental? What's that like to drive?
Honestly, I'd say it frees my mind. I don't know how else to put it, but the reason why I wanted to go from a V into a higher class car is because I have really bad ADHD. So I need something that's happening, right?
Right.
Yeah, so being in a Continental, it just frees my mind. Like I feel like I'm in that moment, I'm present, things are happening present in that, I'm living life in that moment, which is not a very common feeling, especially if you have ADHD, I believe.
Right. So, when you're new and you're in some of the lower level classes, and I shouldn't call them lower level classes, maybe slower classes. Entry level classes might even be a better terminology. You kind of get brought into the fold. People want to help you out. You've jumped to Formula Continental, which is not an entry level class, in my opinion.
Yes.
And you were at Sebring on the racetrack with some fantastic race car drivers, national champions. How have your fellow drivers, now that you're a little past the driver's school stage, how have your fellow drivers embraced you at the track?
Very welcoming. I would say that everybody is adding to my experience. They do share about what they, what had helped them when they were at my stage. I mean, obviously there's like a bit of frustration that comes in when they tell me something and I'm not able to execute it. And, they're like, why can't you do it? I'm like, because I don't even know how to or what to feel for.
Right.
So, yeah, just a bit of that. But overall, they have been patient. I think what I have promised, and I say this all the time, I was like, I can promise you common sense, but nothing more than that on the track as of now.
Right. Well, you're only 7 races into your racing career. So, giving yourself a little bit of grace, I think, is important to success, and trying to build, I look at racing as building blocks. And every race you add another block to the foundation. And at some point, if you do it long enough, your building blocks start to look like a pyramid. And you get to the pointy end at the top, and you should be racing for wins and championships. So at 7 races in, I don't know that you've even put yourself down a foundation yet. So, give yourself a little bit of grace in all of that. Let's talk about working real quick. Stewards in training, flagging. How has that been? How did they hook you in? Let's start with that.
The flagging is actually what I would say my first introduction to SCCA was.
Oh, good.
Yeah, so I flagged in May 2024 at a Carolinas race event.
Okay.
I think it was the majors. I didn't even know what majors was at that point.
Sure.
But they needed people, and I was like, sure, let me try what this is. So that's where it started with the flagging situation. And then, you get one in, then you get kind of dragged in. Right now, everybody's like, oh, come to this event, do this and do that. So that was really fun. For stewardship, I basically nagged my regional chief until he was like, okay, fine, like whatever, let's get you in. But yeah, overall, like they have been so supportive with this. Nice. When the stewardship training program started, they were coordinating what events they can get me into, where can I be? I've already been an operating steward. So nice. That was really fun for majors.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was crazy. I'm just happy that all the cars made it to the track and off the track. That was my standard.
Right. I encourage new drivers to take advantage of the opportunities when you don't have the chance to drive, whether it's because you don't have the time or you don't have the money to drive, because of course what we do is not inexpensive. It's great to just spend time at the racetrack learning, and you can learn almost as much. You can learn so much standing on a corner and watching other people take different lines through a corner, and also what the flaggers do, so you know what to look for when you're in the car and all of that kind of stuff. So I'm always encouraging people to take the time to do that. So that's pretty awesome. What does the future hold race car wise for Arshia Akhtar?
So my first and foremost goal is my licenses, right? So I have to build up to that. I do have my full competition license. I do want to get my IMSA and my FIA license. I'm working with coaches on both sides on how to achieve that. As of now, I have, just dies in the middle. It's the allergies.
That's all good. We're
yeah. So as of now, I'm basically having one race per month.
Right.
In a continental for the rest of the year.
Great.
Mainly doing majors and super tours. Hopefully, I'm aiming for runoffs. So
great.
That's a big thing. Excited for that. Already have my one major and one super tour in, which is crazy to me that happened.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, that's what it is. IMSA by mid of this year, and then FIA license by the end of this year. But I think my biggest goal is to be a better driver.
Yeah.
Somebody that I could be proud of.
Sure.
On the track.
Sure. So all of this takes money, and to grow up into the larger echelons, most of us can't do it just writing our own checks. Have you thought about how to take being the first Pakistani woman race car driver and helping that to bring sponsors in and all of that? I have to imagine that's a great selling point.
Well, about that, it's a bit an unfortunate kind of, I'd say it has its pros and cons. Yes, I am getting recognition, but honestly, the motorsport does not have that much recognition in Pakistan. They're big on cricket and hockey. So there's a bit of hesitancy of what even is she doing? What's happening?
Right.
So I think I'm literally building on that, where I'm trying to educate people. What am I doing for them to? Yeah. So I think that's where it's at for now. But hopefully,
Yeah.
hopefully soon.
Well, and you're just starting out. So, I mean, another year or two down the road, you're going to have a lot more experience under your belt. You'll have a lot more laps in the bank, as I like to call it.
Exactly.
And there'll be more television coverage of you on the super tours that you can show to people, like the interview that we're doing here today, the interview that we did at the super tour in Sebring, all of that stuff. We do a lot of things with young drivers on this show. And one of the reasons I love having young drivers and new drivers on the show is because it gives them an opportunity to be able to learn the craft of selling yourself. Racecraft is extremely important, but there are some fantastic race car drivers out there that never got to get to the next level because they didn't know how to present themselves. And I think things like having people on as interview guests during the Super Tours, bringing them on Inside the SCCA, it just adds again to your bank of knowledge and your resume that you can then go and talk to a potential sponsor or whatever the case may be. So,
That's very true. And it also, I think it's not just important in terms of like sponsorship point of view. It helps other drivers give a better idea of who you are, right? Like where you stand on the track. So kind of a chance to listen to your story off track. And I think that helps in adding to that SCCA family feeling because now they know who you are, where you're standing at, what your experience is at, and what to kind of expect out of you.
Yeah, very cool. Very cool. Well, we're getting close to the end of the show here, and this is where I like to give you a chance to thank all of the people who helped get you to where you are today, and so the floor is yours for that opportunity.
Well, there's so many people, like because of everything that I keep inserting myself into. I think I'd love to thank Drivers Cup people. They have been an immense support in teaching me how to drive open wheel car as well as introducing me. FRP Racing, lending me their Formula Continental and trusting me that I will be able to handle that car, providing me with coaching. Obviously, Frank, and then my regional people, right? Like Bob Neff, he's been an insane support, as well as Mike, he's the FNC chief for my region. That man has pushed me and put me out there and motivated me to come back to the track in this bad, awful Texas weather. I love everything about Texas. I hate the weather though. Like I cannot.
I love it. Where are we going to see you next on the Super Tour? What's your next Super Tour event?
So actually, it's a bit up in the air. This one.
Okay.
So it's either going to be at VIR or at Mid Ohio.
Okay.
Before that, I'll be at Road Atlanta with the FRP series.
Nice. I can't thank you enough for hopping on and talking with us today. I appreciate it. This is exactly what I thought this conversation would be. You've got a lot going on, and I just can't thank you enough. And I want to wish you good luck with all the stuff that's going on. And as you progress, we have had lots of multiple time guests on the show. A lot of times we bring them back to talk about what's new in their career, and that invitation will and always will be open to you, and that will continue.
Yeah, I'm scared of Road Atlanta coming up. If I live through that and I survive to see the rest of my life, I have been on Road Atlanta in a Wii. That was scary. So I'm just like, will I survive that in a Continental? Please, God.
Well, I will tell you, as someone who's got some laps in at Road Atlanta, turn 12 is pretty intimidating. That's a big cement wall that you're basically pointing your car straight at, coming down the hill. But lots and lots of people have survived turn 12 just fine. I have no doubt that you will use that common sense that you say you bring with you, and you'll have. First of all, Road Atlanta is a blast. It is an absolute
It's really
hoot.
fun.
So I think you'll do great.
I'm scared of turn 1. That's what I'm scared of.
Really?
Yes, I am trying to figure out the line to turn 1.
Sure.
So if whoever's watching this show, you got tips, put it in. I want to know.
That's right. Put some tips in the show notes. Do you sim race?
I do, yeah. I started with like a $30 wheel sim base, so I'm just upgrading it a bit now so that it replicates somewhat.
I think that will be, even just to do, an hour or two before you go to a new track. That will give you a little bit of a sense of ease your mind just a little bit. Turn 1's not as scary as turn 12.
But you're absolutely right about Sim. The reason why I survived Sebring, being the first time there with like 17 turns, is Sim. I had an idea of what the track looked like. But yeah, thank you so much, Brian.
That's awesome. All right, that's going to do it for another episode of Inside the SCCA, presented by RaceSchool.com. If you like what you're hearing, subscribe to the RacingWire Podcast Network so you won't miss any episodes. It would also be great if you leave a comment, especially if it's a good one. You can follow us on social media to find out who our next guest is and leave a question. It's at RacingWire on Twitter. There are new Inside the SCCAs every week. I'm Brian Bielanski. Have yourself a fantastic weekend. Stay safe and go play with cars.